So, let's get started. As I think I mentioned last week, one of the things that I'd like to do as kind of an ongoing thing is maybe a quick session each week on apologetics, why we believe what we believe. And most of the information that I've gathered from this will come from Frank Turek, whose name I've mentioned in the past, and other periodicals or books that I might have. But this one I thought was interesting. It's called Crimes, Crimes being an acronym for helping us to understand the scientific evidence for a creator. You know, I've heard people say in the past, and in fact, a fellow I used to work with said, well, you have to have blind faith in order to come to, to believe in Jesus Christ. Well, you don't. I mean, it's so they have to have faith and make the move toward him and he toward us, but there's evidence. And so I'll just go through this quickly and continue to try to put forth these various pieces of information as time goes on, because I find them fascinating, particularly when we're talking to people who may have an evolutionary background, or they believe in evolution, Darwinism, whatever the case might be. And this one simply is it's scientific evidence for a creator, and it begins with the letter C, which stands for the cosmological argument. Kind of a difficult word, but this argument for it is based on the premise that the universe had a beginning, which science says started about 13.8 billion years ago. And so evolution requires two things: it requires time and it requires chance. The longer the time, the more they feel they can make their argument for evolution being a realistic a viewpoint. This is really the Big Bang theory. We've all heard the story about the Big Bang. And the question is kind of falling into disfavor because even the atheists today are saying, well, I don't know where that which blew up or whatever came from. Where did it come from? And that's a big part of this argument. So the Big Bang theory states that everything that exists has a cause. So what caused the Big Bang? This is an argument for those who say, well, it all started with the Big Bang. But what caused it? The cause must be outside our limited space time matter continuum, because each of these space time and matter came about with the creation of the universe. All this started at one time, as we read in Genesis. Every argument for a beginning requires a cause. It can't just happen out of nothing. There has to be a first cause. And if we see and we think about it, the first cause for everything is that which is unseen, that which is eternal. It has to be God, who was not created. He always was. Now that's a difficult thing for us to get our minds around, but that's the answer to this whole issue. Every argument for a beginning requires a cause, which has to lead to an external cause, someone or something outside the bounds of the physical universe. And of course, we're finite in our thinking, and very difficult for us to comprehend that. Number two, or R, represents reason, our ability to reason and think. Did that evolve? Did that just come about? To think logically points to a rational mind behind the universe. I mean, ability to think and focus and so forth didn't just evolve. It couldn't have. If our mental abilities were purely the product of random, unguided processes, why would we trust them to lead us to the truth? How can there be any truth if we just have, if our thoughts and so forth just happen to be random? They had to be put there. The laws of logic are immaterial, universal, and unchanging, qualities that don't fit into a purely materialistic worldview. Of course, materialism is everything you see. It's all the material and matter and everything that we see. Naturalism, which is defined as everything is a function of a natural process, struggles to explain why our minds, which evolved for survival, would also be geared toward discerning truth. So that's the key right there. What is truth and where does it come from and how do we get it? The best argument is that our minds were created by a rational, logical being. Then information. This is where we get into DNA, which is just probably the last, Mark, you may know more about it than I do, but the last, what, 40, 50 years or so, we've started to understand a little bit about DNA and information and so forth that's contained in it. The specificity and complexity of information encoded in DNA points to an intelligent source. And I've heard this stated many times, I don't fully understand it, but DNA contains information enough to fill up enough encyclopedias to stretch from here to the moon, in terms of how complex it is. DNA operates like a highly advanced, this is our DNA, this is what's in our system, highly advanced code or language. And we know codes and language always originate from a mind. So DNA, which has information, had to be created by a logical, intelligent mind. The sheer complexity of this process makes the possibility of just random natural development impossible. Just as a book requires an author the information rich structured of DNA suggests an intelligent designer. So we have cosmological reason and information. The next is morality. Objective moral values, which we know the moral code comes from what? The Ten Commandments, the Jewish law. Objective moral values and duty imply the existence of a moral lawgiver. If you don't have moral laws, if you don't have a moral lawgiver, you don't have moral laws. If moral laws apply universally, what is their origin? Where'd they come from? Murder and rape are recognized as objectively wrong across cultures all over the world. And it points to a universal moral standard. Whether you're Muslim, Jew, Christian, atheist, agnostic, whatever you may be, we all know that murder and rape are morally, reprehensible. Some might argue that morality is simply a social construct that varies by culture and circumstances in circumstance, but if morality is poorly relative, it would be impossible to criticize practices like genocide or slavery. How could we? We could. And that's a big thing that was going on. I don't know if it's still as prevalent today, but for the longest time, one of the things that was transcending through the culture was moral relativism, or there's no moral absolutes. So if it's okay for me, then it should be okay for you. If it's okay for you, I'm fine with it. So no, that's the idea that there are no moral absolutes. The existence of moral values requires a moral lawgiver who has to be God. The next is evil. The existence of evil is often used as an argument against God. We hear that all the time. I think that's one of the strongest or one of the most widely held arguments by atheists and others. How could a loving God allow evil to take place? But it points, the evil thing points to the existence of a moral standard, which implies a moral lawgiver. How do we know something's evil if we don't know that there's good? You can't have one without the other. Philosophers have long argued evil as evidence against God, but acknowledging evil requires a recognition of good, which requires an objective moral standard. If evil is real, it presupposes a standard of good that transcends human opinion. This standard points to God, who defines what is good and evil. Evil isn't evidence against God, but rather evidence of a moral framework that God upholds. The question is, why does evil exist, which we won't get into at this time. And then S is specific design. The fine tuning of the universe. This is where if the moon was a mile closer, a mile further away, or the sun was a little bit closer, a little bit further away, life couldn't exist. It wouldn't happen. Everything was precisely placed by a creator who is all knowing and so forth. So the fine tuning of the universe and biological system strongly suggests intentional design. The precise constants, or that which is always there, and conditions necessary for life to exist cannot be explained by chance alone. Again, evolution, time, and chance. From what do they say? From the goo to the zoo to you. That takes billions of years to get to that point. Alone, let's see, uh, for life to exist cannot be explained by chance alone. For example, constants that govern the universe, like gravitational and electromagnetic forces, are finely tuned for life. Change one of them even slightly, just microscopically, those laws, and life wouldn't be able to exist. It wouldn't exist. So it can't be argued that the universe is fine tuned. And there's so much more. There's so much evidence today and information available to support that, that when you go through these arguments and you think about things objectively and logically, you have to come to a conclusion or come to the conclusion that the universe is created. It's created by it's that uncaused first cause, if you will. What caused it? And that's people struggle with the fact that our creator, and we don't understand this, is outside time. He's in eternity. That's how he, as we read in Isaiah 46, 9 and 10, says he sees the end from the beginning. And so he's that unseen cause. He's eternal. There has to be some eternal cause that was never created. Otherwise, you just keep going back and back and back and back. But God is eternal. And uh, it cannot be argued that the universe is fine tuned. In addition, biological systems like bacterial flagellum, did I say that right, Mark? Which is a hair-like appendage. I read a book years ago called something to do with irreducible complexity by a guy by the name of Michael Behe, who I think was from Lehigh University, and I'm not sure he was a Christian, but he was a scientist who made the case for just what we're talking about, creation, like certain parts of our body, one can't function without the other, which means that they had to both be created at the same time. Wasn't as though our eye was created and then our ability to see kind of evolved over billions of years. There are nerve endings that have to leave the back of the eye and attach to the brain and so forth in order to function. That all has to happen at one time. Irreducible complexity, as he called it. Uh, like bacterial flagellum, hair-like appendages on cells, and these flagellum are on cells throughout the body, are primary organs of motion, which is present in many microorganisms. In other words, these are little hair-like things that move and cause the cells to move and do whatever it is they do within the system, all in a very organized, precise fashion, which means irreducible complexity, which means they could not function if any part was removed, which proves that some systems have to be designed, I would say all systems, designed as fully formed systems. Okay, some organisms and parts of our system, you can't just have one and then the other follows along in order to create whatever's created. So that's if anybody wants, I can start making copies of these things and you can have them because it's hard to remember them. But it's good to learn these things, I think, and have them in your back pocket. There was a guy that used to use things like this. He was a professor at UConn, and he was a Darwinist. And every Thursday, he had an editorial in the Hartford Courant. And I no sooner got finished reading it, and I'd fire off an email, you know, and we'd go back and forth and back and forth, and he would never come to our way of thinking. But I could kind of think that maybe because of things like this, certainly not my innate knowledge, but things like this that maybe he'll think about, you know. So, guys like this stuff? Yeah. Okay. All right, moving along. What I thought we'd do is I go crazy with these PowerPoints anymore, but I just find it helps me. What I try to do when I put together something like this is to listen to the whoever I'm listening to, and then put the notes on a piece of paper. And by copying and putting them in a PowerPoint helps me to remember because get to be a certain age. We just had dinner like 45 minutes ago. I have no idea what we so this helps a little bit. So, I think the big thing in the news, and I'm going to get hopefully back to the reasons for studying prophecy, but the big thing in the news today is, oops, come back to me here. Big thing in the news today is this peace process. What's going on between Hamas and Israel. And so I thought what I'd do is I listened to, and none of this is original stuff, and some of it's conjecture. So I like to think of presentations like this as being in the what if category. What if these points are true? That's not to say that everything that we've recorded here is necessarily true, but food for thought, if you will. And so this particular PowerPoint came from an interview between a guy by the name of Brandon Holthouse and um, Olivier Melnick. Olivier Melnick is he's originally from France. He's Jewish. He has a very large ministry, primarily designed to uh, help people witness to Jewish people. And he's very in tune with everything that's going on in terms of anti-Semitism. In fact, he just finished a book uh, that deals with anti-Semitism, a pretty in-depth book, which I did order. I haven't received it yet, but it's in the mail somewhere. So, uh, this first slide I've entitled "Peace and Security." So, before we get to, many have noted, as we, and I'm going to take a look at Ezekiel 38 real quick. As many have noted, we hear the term peace and security often mentioned and has been mentioned a lot in the news recently by, rightfully so, by President Trump and others that now Israel is in a period of peace and security that we've solved, quote, this 3,000-year-old problem. And so the question is whether or not Hamas will uphold its end of the bargain or not. And my suggestion to everyone here is there's no way they're going to hold, they're going to hold to their end of the bargain. But we're just going to have to wait and see how things play out. So, peace and safety. What do we see in the Bible regarding the terms peace and safety? And the first place that I've noted here, and we can find many suggestions as we get to the last days that there will be false peace, false agreements, security agreements in place before Antichrist comes on the scene and or before some big event takes place. And for the most part, these are are false peace treaties, like we read about in Daniel 9, where Antichrist, remember, enters into a 7-year treaty with Israel. Now, this is not that treaty because that will signify the beginning of the tribulation and will occur after the rapture of the church. We know that because we know from Scripture that Antichrist cannot be revealed until the church has been removed. So, at any rate, we have that. We also note in Isaiah, I think it's 28, that Israel us- will 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 fall for a covenant with death. The covenant with death is the same that we just referenced, the covenant between Antichrist and the Jewish people. That's not what we're talking about here, but at that time, Israel, when Antichrist comes on the scene, they'll sit down, it'll be Antichrist and some representative of Israel enter into a peace treaty for Israel that will be broken 3.5 years later, if you remember, at the midpoint of the tribulation. In addition to that, we find in Ezekiel 38, now, Ezekiel 38, as we all know, is a prophecy of a coming war between Israel and several local enemies, including Turkey, Russia, Iran, Libya, and the Sudan. Parts of what the Bible calls Put and Cush. So, so those five groups will come against Israel at some point in time. And as we read through Ezekiel 38, it becomes very clear that the one who will orchestrate that is God Himself. God has a very real purpose for doing it. I think the stage is being set now for that to occur. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. We don't know when that event's going to take place. But uh, what we see, which I find fascinating, and if you think about what Israel has done in the last 2 years, it's mind blowing. And I'm glad that President Trump got so much praise and attention, but let's not forget what Israel by themselves, particularly when we had the prior administration, did and what they've accomplished. It's Israel that's decimated, at least nearly decimated Hamas. It's Israel that has dealt a very lethal blow to Hezbollah. It's Israel that had the intelligence to know where to drop the bombs that we dropped to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. But Israel's just done an amazing job. And if you go back real quick to Ezekiel 38 10, uh, what we see is a prophecy about Israel in verse 10 of Ezekiel 37, where it says, I prophesied as he commanded me. That's Ezekiel referencing the Lord who's commanding him, and breath entered into them. We've talked about that. But then it came after Israel becomes a nation again, and they came back to life, which we know happened in toward the end of the 18th century, the 1800s, and then Israel became a nation in 1948, and has now gotten to the point. I think I mentioned this last week, where 46% of all Jews, or 47% of all Jews in the world now live. Or I'm sorry, I take that back. 50% or more of the Jews in the world now live in Israel, which is just an amazing thing. Um, it's like those that have a replacement theology view that says that the church has replaced theology. Well, I don't see the church or Gentiles moving to Israel. It's Jews that are moving to Israel, exactly as was foretold in the scriptures. But at any rate, getting back to verse 10, they came to life, meaning Israel coming back into existence, and stood up on their feet a vast army. Now, in the Hebrew, that means a powerful army.
Yeah, that's not, I don't see that.
Ezekiel 37, verse 10.
37.
Oh,
Yeah,
I see.
It said
yeah,
38.
yeah. 37,
It
verse
says
10.
38 up there.
Yeah, I'm ad libbing here a little bit. Not everything I do is in the notes, John.
So we're in Genesis right now, so I'm just saying, if you need to let us know.
So anyway, I may do that from time to time. I apologize. But anyway, what this is a prophecy about Israel becoming a very powerful army in the last days. And I would suggest that's exactly what we've seen over the last 2 years. But now, back to Jack, Ezekiel 38, verse 11. Uh, This is God speaking uh, to God, speaking to Gog, Gog, the one who will lead this confederation. That God's going to put the thoughts in His mind to move along with these other nations we just mentioned against Israel. He says, "I'm going to uh, put the thoughts in your mind." And in verse 11, it says very specifically you will say, you Gog, will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. So, Ezekiel 38, this invasion cannot occur until Israel thinks it's in a time of peace and safety. And so, with everything that's going on today, with the relations being developed between Israel and other Arab nations, say what you will about those relations, but be that as it may, um, and everything that's happened, you can well see that Israel is rapidly approaching that time where they'll think they're in a period of peace and safety and prosperity. And so I think that with everything that's happened, with the signing of the agreement, with all of the rhetoric about what a great deal it is, and it is a great deal. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that our country is so strongly supporting Israel. But by the same token, I think there's this mistaken idea that this can be solved, and we know that it can't because we know the end of the story. And so we go there, and if we go to First Thessalonians
What
chapter
version are
5,
you in?
pardon me,
What version are you in?
what?
The Bible, what version? Bible version.
I'm in the new NIV.
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 Okay, that's what I want.
Yeah. So in First Thessalonians, yeah, some of the translations might say something a little bit different. I think some might
Yeah,
say
it does.
peace and security. Um, First Thessalonians chapter 5, speaking about peace and security. And all the peace and securities that are mentioned throughout Scripture are presumed or contrived or thought to be legitimate because we read here in chapter 5 where it talks about the day of the Lord. That's what introduces chapter 5 in my Bible. It says the day of the Lord. In chapter 5 of First Thessalonians, verse 1, brothers and sisters, about times and dates we do not need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. And so the beginning, and I think this is probably the beginning of the tribulation being referenced here, or when Israel is, the abomination takes place. It's really not clear, but there's going to be a time of peace and safety. Everybody's just going to be, and that kind of, if you think about it, ties into the prophecy in the Olivet Discourse about the days of Noah when they were marrying, given in marriage, just kind of a, oh boy, everything is fine approach and attitude about things. And we're rapidly moving in that direction, in those directions, where people are just, going about their business. Everything's fine. We don't need to worry about a thing. And, but sudden destruction is going to come. And that word sudden means just that. It's going to happen very quickly and very suddenly. And so I think what we're seeing right now with the peace agreement and tremendous efforts by so many different people. And I must say, President Trump is brilliant in the way he's able to bring people together. For example, you might remember it wasn't that long ago that Israel took out several Muslim leaders, Hamas leaders, in Qatar when they sent a rocket in there, and then Qatar was really upset. What Trump did was he said, "Okay, well, let's get Bibi on the phone, and we'll talk about it." And so I'm sure it was much more sophisticated and complex, but there was a three-way conversation between leaders in Qatar, Bibi Netanyahu, and President Trump, and through this, they were able to mend their fences so that Qatar willingly jumped on Israel's side and supported the elimination or getting rid of Hamas, which is an amazing thing because Qatar really has been the hiding place for Hamas leaders for a long time. So I give them tons of credit for that. But by the same token, and who can fault anybody? It's like I was listening to Olivier talking or somebody talking about, oh, I guess it was Jonathan Kahn in another conversation that I listened to about what's happening uh, in Gaza. And we'll talk about that in a moment because it's fascinating what's going on there in terms of ancient Israel and the Philistines and so forth. But as he said, these people are being pulled along. They have no idea that there is a strong spiritual battle that's behind all of these things. So here's the first question, keeping in mind this whole idea of peace and security. I think that people are going to be giddy with the idea that we're rapidly approaching this time, and understandably so. But we as Christians, not that we're doom, we're preaching doom and gloom, but we have an obligation to let people know that, hey, here's what's really going on, and the Bible talks about times of false peace and security. So, questions. These are just some hypothetical questions. Number one, when it came to Hamas and Israel was under a lot of pressure, my question is, did Israel, with pressure from the US and other nations, make the same mistake they did when they didn't wipe out the Canaanites? If you go through the Old Testament, Deuteronomy and other places, God told them to wipe out the Canaanites, to drive them out, to kill every man, woman, child, all the animals, just wipe them out. Now, we could go on and go down to a huge rabbit hole. Why would God do that? And there's a lot of reasons for it, which we won't get into now. But God, remember, He knows the hearts of those people and so forth. But the point is that Israel didn't do it. They didn't do that. They didn't wipe them out as God instructed them to do, and left some remnants here and there. And what that's done is to lead to future uh, difficulties because the Canaanites and others are the descendants, for the most part, of Ishmael and Ishmael's 12 sons. And we read that Ishmael and his 12 sons, which became great nations, all had the same characteristic that they're wild donkeys of men and they're always fighting against their brothers. And I think the classic example of that was just yesterday, the day before, where Hamas was literally killing Palestinian citizens. You probably heard that on the news.
Killing what? Who?
Palestinian citizens in Gaza. The Hamas was killing their own citizens. Yeah. Yeah. And what that does is it just gives credence to the fact that they're always going to be waging war against each other, battling against each other. You have, the Jews, which essentially, if you trace back to the time of Isaac and Ishmael, they're kind of half brothers, if you will. So they're fighting against each other. And then you got the Sunnis versus the Shia and this group versus that group. I mentioned this before. Somebody said one time that if they had their way, at the end of the day, there'd only be one Muslim left because they keep killing each other until there's just one left. But that's kind of an inherent characteristic they have. Whether or not that's the sole reason God gave that command, I can't answer. But we know that Israel is about to give up 1,700 or so Hamas prisoners, so they haven't been wiped out. Hamas is not going to just lay their arms down. They're not going to do it. So it just seems like history may be repeating or may be repeating itself. When the hostilities began, you may remember that Netanyahu said that Israel was going to wipe out Hamas. He said that. Now, that didn't happen. I mean, it would put him in a very difficult position if he just went in and just during a time. I mean, he couldn't do it now, but that was not accomplished. And I think that he is under probably a certain amount of pressure because I can tell you the people in Israel, they don't want Hamas to continue. They don't want them to live on. It's a difficult subject to comprehend. But as we'll see when we get into Jonathan Cahn's discussion, what Hamas is under a spiritual guidance that has survived millennia, and it's part of their DNA. So, according to the Mosaic covenant, if a nation sheds blood, they need to be eliminated. That's what the law says. Now, we know that we're not under the law, but Israel, for the most part, still is. Hamas has not been wiped out, and they still have their charter. Now, I actually printed out a copy of the Hamas charter, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's very long, but this has been, I think it was drafted, if I'm not mistaken, in the 60s, has been updated a couple of times, but just a couple of excerpts from the actual Hamas charter. There's a Palestinian charter, then there's the more specific Hamas charter. This is right in their rules of the road, if you will, included in there. Israel is this is the Hamas charter. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before us. So it's right in their charter that their intention is to obliterate Israel. And there's a lot to this. Then here's another excerpt. The covenant of the Islamic resistance movement, which is what Hamas, the Islamist resistance movement represents Hamas, clarifies its picture, reveals its identity, outlines its stand, explains its aims, speaks about its hopes, and calls for its support, adoption, and joining its ranks. Our struggle against the Jews is very great and very serious. This is definitely a satanic organization because we know that God or that Satan longs to see every Jew wiped off the face of the earth. This just really gets to the real power that Satan has. It needs all sincere efforts. It is a step that inevitably should be followed by other steps. The movement is but one squadron that should be supported by more and more squadrons from this vast Arab and Islamic world until the enemy is vanquished from Allah's victory is realized, and Allah's victory is realized. So we have this charter, which basically it represents the viewpoints of Islam. I can remember several years ago they used to talk about peaceful Islam. And the question I would ask is, where has Islam ever brought peace? They never have, and the idea that there are so-called moderate Muslims, you know, I don't think anybody in this room would be a moderate Christian because we subscribe to every word in the Bible. And the Quran has um, challenges or requirements or admonitions for violence. For example, it says to slay the idolaters wherever you find them. That's in the Quran. So you really, if you can't be a Muslim and say that part of it's not true. And those are, I think, 100 calls for violence in the Quran, something like that. So this idea, and again, there's certainly a vast majority of Muslims that would not do what Hamas and ISIS and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah do. They're, just not. That's not the way they operate. But the basic premise is that Islam is it came about through what is often referred to as the point of the sword. That through violence is how Islam spreads. And you look today, one of the objectives that Muslims have is to develop a worldwide caliphate. And you look how they've infiltrated Europe and France. We'll talk a little bit about France in a moment. And even the United States. You look at Dearborn, Michigan is now they have their five times a day where they worship, and they have the loudspeakers. They come on 5 times. If you've ever been to Israel, you hear that. It's just kind of annoying, but what we see that we have certain members in Congress that are Muslim. Mandami is a true Islamist. He hates the Jewish people. But yet, 22% of Jews, American Jews, are scheduled to or are going to be voting for him. We'll talk a little bit about American Jews. There's a big distinction between American Jews and Jews in Israel. Hamas has not been wiped out. So there's two different ideologies. That's what we need to remember that are in play today. And when it comes to Islam, it's really not a matter of politics. It's a question of religion. Muslims believe that they need to subjugate everybody in the world. And then you have the Shiites, for example, that are looking forward to the coming Mahdi and their responsibility, which is why you see such a strong hatred for just about everything by people like the mullahs in Iran and so forth. Their goal is to create uh, chaos to usher in the times of the Mahdi. But there's two different ideologies at play. We got the West, we value life. Israel, and I had to put this in here, and this is one of the things that was stated in the interview I listened to. Israel is the epitome of this mindset that they value life. You can see that with the way the country united to get their brothers and sisters that were in captivity back, and what they've done to lessen the collateral damage in Gaza in spite of the propaganda against them. You still have people out there saying that Israel has committed genocide, which is so far from the truth, it's not even worth talking about. We have two ideologies. The other is the Muslim world, particularly the radicals that worship death. And martyrdom is literally a goal. But so why is that? That's why I say it's a religious distinction because Muslims believe that Allah is very fickle and that you're not going to get to paradise unless your good works, your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds. It's a typical, even exaggerated gospel of works. There's no grace with Allah as there is with Jesus. Big distinction. So they fear that Muslims go through their whole life thinking, man, it's not just that you do good works, but your good works have to outweigh your bad works. And Allah better be in the right frame of mind at the time you're called to go to wherever it is you go. But on the other side of that, the one way to be ensured entry into Allah's presence, into their paradise, is by martyrdom, to be killed in the name of Islam. That's why you saw so many, and we don't see it so much now, but there was a time when you saw all these guys with bombs pasted to themselves and they blew themselves up, and mothers would celebrate, and be excited that they're going to be reunited with their sons one day, and that because their lives were taken or they died uh, in the name of Islam, they're going to immediately be taken to paradise, where they're going to a very hedonistic lifestyle that will exist when they get there. They have 72 virgins. They have all of this exotic food. It's just a totally hedonistic uh, 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 future that they look forward to. So that's why you see that the difference. We don't look forward to death, but they kind of look at it as the only surefire way to have any kind of peaceful existence, eternal existence. The only thing that Muslims respond to is force. I think we've seen that over and over again. Again, it's not political, it's religious. It's not these groups necessarily, it's the religion that no one wants to address. Everybody's afraid of it, naturally so. You have 900 safe zones now in Europe, that 900 zones that are under Sharia law that you can't go into. It's protected under Sharia law, and it's growing. Islam is growing. Really, their birth rate is like 3 or 4 times what ours is. Right now in the United States, I think we're at about 1.4 or 1.6, and you need two in order to sustain the population. If it's continued at the current levels, there'd come a point in time when the country would cease to exist. Muslims, on the other hand, are having 5, 6, 7 kids, and it's all part of their long-term strategy. So the expanding Muslim threat is causing problems in Europe, even the United States, Middle East. Like I said, we're watching Dearborn, Michigan go up in flames. In New York City, Palestinians flooded the streets recently to celebrate October 7th. Can you imagine that? And of course, we see that all over the world. It's not Hamas or even the Islamic issue. This is what we need to remember. It's a demonic, satanic, evil issue that is motivating these people. These people are totally under the direction. They call it Luciferian agenda or whatever it might be, but Satan is in control. According to Olivier Melnick, who was the guy I was listening to, the modern American Jew, and this is always, and we have some friends that are Jewish. There is, they hate Bibi Netanyahu as much as he is pretty much loved in Israel. But the American Jews are an enigma. And somebody was saying recently that as difficult as it may be, they're probably going to have to experience something pretty severe to bring them back into the fold, because we have 22% of Jews that have so far in early voting voted for Mandami. Why is that? How can that be? So they're more interested in things like social justice. That's really not a big issue, but then it is a big issue, but it's not one that we need to think too much about. As far as Melnick, he says, and Melnick is a Jew, he's from France. And he points out that the Jews in France are getting the picture that it's not safe there. And it's going to happen here eventually. And what's happening is more and more of them are making what they call aliyah, which is moving from wherever they live outside of Israel to Israel. That they feel the only safe place in the world for them to go is a war zone, which is Israel. And so they're moving from places like France. And he pointed out that he knows of a fellow that was leaving synagogue not too long ago. And he ran into some Jew haters and he just beat him to a pulp. And there's another person he knows that said, Olivia was saying to this guy allegedly that, why are you waiting? Why don't you go now? He says, well, at the first sign of something, like if they write a put a swastika on my door or whatever, that's when we're going to leave. But it's becoming terribly unsafe in many places in Europe for Jews to live. Again, this is Bible prophecy. This is being fulfilled. So they're not even sure where it's coming from. Another phenomenon that's taking place is what some are calling this green-red axis, red-green axis, which is some are calling it literally an existential threat for the United States and other countries, because what it is it's not just the Islamists, but it's communists, it's Islamists, it's socialists, it's progressives, it's extreme right, extreme left, all coming together under one umbrella. And the one thing they all have in common is this hatred of Israel, this hatred of the Jews. Totally nonsensical if you think about it. And for that reason, you have to come to the conclusion that it has to be um, demonic. So the only safe place for Jews is in the middle of a war zone, like I said. So just as we saw in Zechariah last week, where it says all nations will come against Israel, we're seeing the stage being set for that today. And it's just amazing how it's exploded since October 7th, 2023. We're witnessing the stage being set. We're nearly halfway there now as far as the Aliyah, Jews moving back with 50% already there. I can remember going back just not that long ago, there might have been 2 million. But now, and there's only 16 or 17 million Jews in the entire world. They represent about 2.5% of the entire world's population. But many of them are being forced. I mean, God's doing it. He said he was going to bring them back from the four corners. We're watching that. We're watching that up close and personal. And during the ice riots, this gets to this red-green axis thing in L.A. There were protests out there, people wearing kefifas, the scarves, carrying Palestinian placards. Really wasn't just about the ICE raids, which, that's another story, but they use it as an opportunity to to celebrate, to expand this anti-Israel organization. So who's behind all this? Well, it's communist organizations. It's groups like the Tides group, if you're familiar with them, and the Rockefellers, and certain elites, and groups like SEIU that are funding these things. In fact, I don't know who it was, but Olivier pointed out that the same person, I guess, thinks is a billionaire contributor who financed much of what happened in LA is the same person who financed what happened at Columbia University, which was exclusively an anti-Semitism number of protests. So we've got the Tides Foundation, the Soros Group. How about Soros Group? And I just put this in here, and he mentioned it. Queers for Palestine. How long do you think those people would last in Hamas? I mean, but you know what that is? That's the irrationality of what we're seeing. It doesn't make an ounce of sense because they wouldn't. I mean, in in various Arab nations, they throw them off roofs. They kill them. But yet, this totally irrational uh, mindset that's out there. So, what is anti-Semitism? This is Olivier's definition. Anti-Semitism is the irrational and satanic hatred of Israel and the Jews, characterized by thoughts, words, and deeds against them. The two key words are irrational and satanic. And we could say it's satanic, thus irrational. That probably makes more sense than irrational and satanic, but it's irrational because of the satanic part of it. So they conclude by saying that Pandora's box has been opened. October 7th was a red letter day, if you will. It was a line in the sand. And now we have this worldwide anti Semitism, and it's not going to be put back in the bottle. It's out there, and it's only going to continue to grow. What they all agree with is the eradication of Israel and the death of all Jews. These groups are ideologically opposed to one another, but when it comes to Israel, they're all in complete agreement. And look at the friends that Israel is losing. People like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson. I didn't know this, but even Megyn Kelly. are becoming anti-Israel in their rhetoric. Strong supporters of the conservative cause, but now, and Candace and Tucker are just off the charts in terms of their anti-Israel hatred. And I don't know where it's coming from, but again, we have to go back and understand that it is satanic in terms of its origin. You keep hearing, even after Charlie Kirk's was killed, that we had people saying things like it was the Mossad that killed Charlie Kirk. And, if somebody says that, there's enough useful idiots out there that believe it, and who knows what that can lead to. We've seen so much violence that this type of rhetoric is just so unhealthy. And that there was a thing going on for the longest time. There were 5 Jewish men behind the World Trade Center bombing. There are people out there that still believe that today, that the Jews that did it, or that Epstein was working for the Mossad. That's why none of the records, so called, have come out. There's even evangelical churches turning against Israel. And I think, like we heard in that talk given last week by Patricia Heaton, that we're at a point where Christians have got to stand in the gap for Israel. And I think that's what God expects. He expects us to do that. Um, so, in conclusion, whether we like it or the world likes it or not, Israel is the only nation mentioned in the Bible that God established a special relationship with. Doesn't mean he doesn't love everybody. He does. Doesn't mean that he doesn't love his church. Jesus certainly loves his church, but God has a special, unique, everlasting, unconditional, uh, unilateral relationship with Israel that is just locked in. So let's take a look real quick at Matthew 25, another text or another example of what we're going to see after the tribulation. Because when Jesus comes back, as we read about in Matthew 25, he's going to perform one of his first judgments, if you will, and that's the separation of the sheep and the goat. And then beginning in Matthew 25, verse 31, when the Son of Man comes or returns in his glory, and remember, we're coming back with him at this point in time, so when he actually physically returns, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations, now, when he says nations, these are people that literally survived the tribulation. The tribulation is over with. Jesus comes back. Uh, he's done all he has to do. We're now, the tribulation's done. 50% of the world's population, but there are going to be people that literally survive it and are alive when he comes back. So for those people, he's going to put them, or he's going to separate, as a shepherd does in verse 32, the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, and this is the sheep he's talking to. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him. Now, the righteous are those that don't take the mark of the beast, are Christians that survive the tribulation. There are going to be those that do. There's also going to be those that don't. Well, likely those that survive but took the mark of the beast. There's no redemption for them. They're toast, as we read about in Revelation 14. So the righteous and righteousness, as we read about in Romans, clearly says when we accept Christ, salvation, that God makes us righteous. So when you see the term righteous, this represents born again believers. Verse 18, when did you see a stranger and invite you in? or needing clothes and clothe you? When did you see us sick? When did you see sick or in prison? See you sick or in prison and go to visit you. Then the king, Jesus, will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. When he says brothers and sisters of mine, he's referring to Jewish believers or Jewish people that that these people, the righteous, have taken care of. Then you will say to those on the left, depart from me, for you are cursed into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So the goats that will be alive, they're judged because they obviously took the mark of the beast. They're not saved. They're not born again. Immediately to the lake of fire. That's one of the first judgments. There's many different judgments that are going to take place. The great white throne judgment at the end of the tribulation, but this happens after Jesus comes back. And I was a stranger. You did not invite me in. I needed clothes, speaking to the goats. I needed clothes. You did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison. You did not look after me. They will also, Lord, when they also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. They will go away to eternal punishment. So basically, what he's saying is that what you did for those, the righteous, is like doing it for me. And what this is a reference to are believers that took care of the Jewish people during the tribulation. So there is some, obviously, they can't be righteous unless they're born again. And we know from what we read throughout Revelation that there's going to be a big revival after the rapture takes place. So this is a clear reference to Jesus saying, "You took care of my brothers, my fellow Jews that were hurting." You know that during the tribulation, two-thirds are going to perish during that second half. So that's what this is all about. So they're going to be taken care. They're going to be the goats are going to the lake of fire. Those that are the sheep, the righteous, will be allowed to enter into the kingdom age. And they're going in as Christians, obviously, but over the period of 1,000 years, which is another, get into this later, they're going to have offspring. And there's going to be come a point in time when these initial believers will have children, and then sin will again be an issue for them during that period of time. He goes on to say, this sheep and goat judgment takes place after the tribulation, which means it's also after the rapture. So it's nothing to do with us whatsoever. Christians today, we need to be models. And I like the way they said this. I never thought about this before. We need to be models when it comes to supporting the Jewish people. We need to be models and we need to be witnessing to them. And even those that we can't lead to Christ, we need to be helping and taking care of. And I know that he mentioned um, uh, one way that you can, just quietly help Jewish people. If you have Jewish people in the neighborhood, just knock on the door and just simply say, even if they're obviously they're Jews, they're not believers, but knock on the door and say, I know you're Jewish, and I just want you to know, I know things are getting tough, and I'm here to help you and support you. Something as simple as that is really what I think the Lord's asking us to do. And I know I need to do a much better job of doing that. So it's after the sheep and goat is after the rapture, and we should be models because we're modeling what Jesus is going to reward believers for after the tribulation. Okay, so with that, I've got yet another PowerPoint. This is only a four-pager, but people are probably familiar with Jonathan Kahn, the writer of The Harbinger. I really never paid much attention to him, but He's been moving more into the mainstream of the prophecy community over the last couple of years. And as I listen to him, and I'll be the first one, I haven't read The Harbinger, I haven't really read any of his books, but as I listen to him, I've come to the conclusion that that the Lord has just given him some incredibly powerful gifts. And he was doing an interview with huh, I forget the guy's name, or it'll come to me, but he was doing an interview. He just wrote a book entitled "The Dragon's Prophecy." Actually, I think he read it back and wrote it back in 2024. So, anybody ever read that? Dragon's Prophecy? I haven't read it either. But he was summarizing and came up with some really fascinating pieces of information. And I'll just go through this because he starts out his discussion by stating Satan's an imitator. He's a mimic. He imitates, always will imitate what God does. And here's some points. He says, if God is going to resurrect his ancient people, bring them back to the land, Satan's going to do the same thing. As we go through these s- slides, you're going to see what we talk about. You're going to bring them back to the land. So God's bringing the Jews back to Israel. Guess what? Satan is bringing his people back to places like what? Gaza. And Satan is going to do the same thing. He's going to bring back the ancient enemies of Israel. Remember, we talked about the fact that the ancient Israelites didn't wipe out the Canaanites as they were told to do. And so, what we're seeing today with people in Gaza, with Hamas, which I believe are largely descendants of the Philistines, Israel's ancient enemy, which happened to reside in where? Gaza, that uh, had they done, had the ancient Israelites, Saul and others did what they were instructed to do, we wouldn't have these problems today. But they survived. But one of these groups was called the Philistines or the Sea People. They included the likes of Goliath. He was a Philistine, and they constantly invaded Israel. The Philistines were very much feared by the Jewish people because they continually raided Israel. Satan has this ancient people. He's got control of them. They're alive and they're here today, even though the people, they don't realize what's going on because they're under the full control of Satan. But they do not know what they're doing. We see from archaeology, there's a couple of inscriptions, what are called Pharaoh's inscriptions. They date back 3,000 or so years that show and demonstrate that Israel came into the land and the Philistines came along at about the same time. So they've been battling and fighting against each other for millennia. The Philistines, ultimately, as we know from Roman history, became Palestina, which was an insult to Israel. That happened in 135 AD when there was a Jewish revolt in Jerusalem, and Emperor Hadrian wiped out all of the Jews that were there, hated the Jews, and renamed Jerusalem Palestina, which is where the word Palestine came from. So it has its origins in this hatred of this ancient people, named them after the Philistines. When Israel was in the beginning stages of coming back together, really around the 1800s, we know it really happened formally in 1948, but they had the Jewish Congress and really Jews from various places um, from around the world starting to come up with the idea that we need to get back to our homeland. That really started under a guy by the name of Herzl, Theodore Herzl, in the late 1800s. So the word Philistine also began to emerge and resurface within the Arabic language. The word in Arabic is Philistine. So when Israel's resurrection occurred in 48, we also saw this other resurrection that basically began to touch and affect the entire world. So you see this coincidence, if you will. It's not a coincidence of these two groups of people coming together at the same time. So the ancient Philistines lived in Gaza. That's where they're from. Now, one thing we should say about Gaza, even though, and there's some points of the this 20-point peace plan that really are a little troubling because it kind of hints at getting to a two-state solution eventually. It talks about having a spiritual uniting with Hamas and all these crazy things that are part of the Trump 20-point plan. It really doesn't make sense. But um, uh, the ancient Philistines were the group or a group primarily that the Israelites feared. The Gaza Strip came back in 48. Now, again, as I was saying, Gaza is part of Israel. I have a couple of maps here. And as you can see from this one, this is all of the land that God has officially given to Israel. And you can see that over here, Gaza is clearly within those boundaries. That's right near the area where the tribe of Dan settled, uh, in during the times of Joshua. So at some point in time after the tribulation, all of this land is going to be given to the Jews to control during the millennial kingdom. But it's fascinating to think that all of this was given to Israel, and now the world is fighting over this little tiny piece of real estate. I forget what the percentage is, but a very small portion of all the land that God's given to Israel. Now, they've never fully occupied all of it, uh, but that's what it is. So here is a map, the distance between well, this is the 1967 board. You hear about, I think the United Nations, the Secretary General of the UN during a speech says we need to go back when we think about a two-state solution to the pre-1967 borders. And at that time, Jordan had control of all of this. This was, the West Bank, Samaria, Judea. If you went up to the north, Syria had control of the Golan Heights. Uh, Fortunately, Trump and his last administration clearly demonstrated and articulated that the Golan belongs to Israel, and Gaza was under the control of Egypt. This is the whole what they call Gaza Strip. And so in 1967, Israel was attacked by five Arab nations, what's known as the Six-Day War. That's when they annexed or took back Gaza. And then ultimately the Sinai Peninsula they took as well, but they gave that back to Egypt. And so they controlled Gaza until 2005, when they agreed under Ariel Sharon and George Bush to remove all the Jews that were living there, literally force them out, pulled them out of there that were living there, and gave it to the Palestinians. 2 years later, they had an election, and that's when Hamas came in and took over. And the population today of Gaza, that tiny little strip, is today like 2 million people. It is just crazy what's going on there. So the Philistines trained their children. Now listen to this. Well, let's get back to this. It's a mystery that Hamas has been overtaken by this same mindset, if you will, that the ancient Philistines had. And there's a connection. There's a biological, genealogical connection, geographical, all these different connections between Hamas and the ancient Philistines. But it's a mystery that's overtaken Hamas is conforming to the ancient, this is what Khan was saying, to the image of the ancient Philistines. They, the Philistines, were a warlike people who hated Israel. Hamas, warlike people who hate Israel. What a coincidence. Hamas and other terrorist groups are warlike people who hate Israel and the Jews. The ancient Philistines trained their children to hate Israel and to become soldiers. For example, we know that Goliath was depicted as having been a man of war since his youth. So they started that at a very young age. The Philistines would launch raids on Israel and did so from the Gaza Strip. This happened 3,000 years ago, and I thought it was interesting that Khan says we shouldn't go to CNN or even Fox. We need to go to God's word to know what's really going on in the world. That's where we're going to find the truth. Hamas is an acronym. It means Islamic Resistance Movement. It's an Arabic word that represents zeal and fervor. It's also a word in the Hebrew that doesn't mean zeal and fervor, but means evil, violence, and destruction. So that goes back, and you find the word not necessarily used in terms of modern Hamas, but you find the word Hamas in the Bible and in various places. In speaking about these raids, this is interesting. The raids from the Philistines into to Israel. It mentions two places where they primarily went. One is in the Negev, which is a desert, and another is a place called Shephelah. Now, where these two areas converge is exactly where the attack on October 7th took place. So you've got not just the same mindset, but the same geographical location that took place. The Bible said that they would take Israeli captives, they even took captives back to Gaza. So this is really an ancient spiritual battle. In the Bible means things like Hamas means things like save me from the man of Hamas and rid Hamas of the land. It also says in that day, it's coming a time where they'll no longer be heard of. And then finally, prophecy is accelerating. We see that. That's what Hamas and what we're seeing in the Middle East tells us very clearly. It's accelerating by evidence, as evidenced by several markers that have been crossed. And for example, Revelation 12. This is something that's going to happen, and it really helps us to see why we're witnessing what we're witnessing, because in Revelation chapter 12. Um, well, we'll just actually go to verse 13 because this is the account of where Satan, also known as the dragon, is cast out of heaven to the earth. And it says in verse 13 that when the dragon, which is Satan, has been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. Now, the woman is Israel. She's the one that gave birth to through the Jews, through Israel, that Jesus came. The woman was given two wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness. So this is that remnant. The Jewish remnant represents evangelical born again Jews that will Satan's coming down. They're coming after, he's going after the woman Israel with an absolute vengeance because he knows his time is really short at that point. And so, and this is where Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation take place, and we know that Satan is cast out at the midpoint of the tribulation. If you go to Revelation 13, and you see that the abomination takes place at what? The midpoint of the tribulation, the abomination of desolation, where Antichrist goes in and desecrates the temple, uh, that's all going to happen at the same time. So the woman was given two wings, in other words, given the ability to escape so that she might fly to a place prepared for her in the wilderness, very likely in a place called Petra, Jordan, where she would be taken care of for a times and a half time, or 3.5 years, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman. So he's going to try to do something when he is cast out of heaven and he's enraged. And he's going to go after Israel and try to somehow overwhelm this remnant to keep them from escaping. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river, whatever it is that that comes with Satan to come, come after the woman. Then the dragon, Satan, was enraged. I mean, Satan is always angry, but not as angry as he's going to be when he's cast out of heaven at the woman. And then he went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, the rest of the Jews, the two-thirds that I think we read about in Zechariah, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to their testimony about Jesus. So Satan is cast out. And so we can see why he is doing everything he can to eliminate the Jewish people. When he comes out of heaven, or he's thrown out of heaven, the first thing he does, he's totally enraged, is to go after that remnant of Jewish people. Because remember, Jesus can't come back until Israel cries out to him. Every Jew in the world could accept Christ, but until, or every Gentile in the world could accept Christ, but until the Jews acknowledge Jesus, he's not coming back. Satan knows that. So think about, Revelation 12 confirms where Israel's ongoing persecution comes from. It's absolute confirmation. We keep saying that this is a satanic attack against Israel. Revelation 12 proves that. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so enraged. He knows his time is short. Um, he'll be enraged and launch a flood out of his mouth at them. He will try to overwhelm them. Hamas has a code word for October 7th. Operation Tufan, which in the Arabic which is an Arabic word for flood. Remember what we just read in Revelation 12? So this is their code word. Think about Samson. You go back to the account of Samson. He was captured by the Philistines when Delilah kind of turned on him a little bit. Then he was taken to Gaza. Then he was put on display. Then he was humiliated, rejoiced over. His capture was celebrated, but then Samson poured the or destroyed the columns and killed, from what we see in the Bible, about 3,000 Philistines. So he wiped them out in the temple of Dion. So where was she today with Hamas? They come in, they capture, they take them back. We saw all the celebrating in the streets. They say that there were roughly 3,000 Hamas terrorists that came into Israel at that time. Again, make what you want out of this, but there just seems to be a lot of coincidences between the ancient Philistines and what we saw with Hamas. The enemy is a desecrator. He takes what is from God and he desecrates it. It's no accident that the Hamas attack occurred on the holiest day of the Jewish week, the Sabbath or Shabbat. It's a day of peace and blessing that was turned into a day of conflict and terror, where which caused or resulted in Hamas celebrating what they did on this holy of all days. Hamas desecrated the Jews just like their forefathers did to Samson, and they had this history of doing. So, what we're seeing today, I think, is clearly just an ongoing situation from what we saw then throughout history and what is really coming back into the fold today. So, in terms of the peace treaty, we'll see what happens. Hamas is in a very difficult situation now. They've lost their hostages, which they used as leverage. So, I wouldn't want to be a member of Hamas, but I think if they're smart, and I don't know how smart they are, but they'll kind of make it seem like they're going along with it to regroup. And ultimately, they're just going to do the same thing all over again. So this is the covenant. It is not the covenant with death, but I believe it is a covenant with death. And I also believe, see, God has there's so many moving parts. The peace and safety aspects, which I think we're watching. Israel becoming an exceeding army. Uh, all of what's going on with Russia and Iran and even Turkey. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, he's a nut job. But yet you have this very close relationship between those three parties. Just a matter of time before God will put the thoughts into Gog's mind. that's when the invasion will occur, is outlined in Ezekiel 38. It has never happened in history, so it's still yet to take place. Different views on when it's going to happen, but my view is it happens either before or right after I think probably before the rapture, but we don't know for sure. Okay, I'm out of breath. Questions, comments?
I have one thought. I have one, I wonder a little. Gaza, what is the size of Gaza? Because they say Israel's like the size of New Jersey,
Yeah, I think it's only,
like Hartford, like the size of.
yeah, I think if memory serves, that there's 2 million people that were living there, very dense.
Yeah,
But I think it's only 12 miles or something, I'm going to say. I may be wrong about that.
right.
But
So why, this thing took place 2 years. I can't figure out for that little bit of territory why that could have been wiped out sooner.
it's a great question. You know why it is? Because Israel could have carpet bombed them on October 8th
Mm,
if they wanted to. They could have wiped them off, but because they have this love for life, remember, we in the West, of which Israel's a part, love life.
I,
And so they didn't want to go in and kill a bunch of innocent people, which
yeah,
is why
right,
they
yeah,
did
with the
that.
hostages.
They could
Plus the
have.
hostages.
They could. And also, you're right, the hostages were there and they were
Yeah.
doing everything they could to protect them.
25 miles.
Pardon me? 25. 20. Thank you. Thank you, Fletch. 25 miles. So not a big area.
And I just heard something from some Jewish people that said, who hate Netanyahu and claim that October 7th was planned and perpetrated, and they did it. The Mossad actually did October 7th. It wasn't the
Yeah,
Palestinians.
right.
It was the Mossad,
What's in the size?
like the secret police
It's like our CIA.
in that the Israelis actually did it, not the
Right.
Palestinians.
Remember, 85% of the reports that came out during this whole 2 year period originated with Hamas. And it's just amazing to me that so many in the media and other organizations have latched on to, all this stuff about ethnic cleansing, and it's just
Yeah.
Satan is working overtime right now. He has such control. But he can't hurt. I mean, we're greater is he that's in us than he that's in the world. So, all right, Father, we just thank you for this time, and we give you glory and honor and praise, and just amazing, Lord, to watch and to know just a little bit about your word, and to watch the fulfillment of so many things that you've said would happen in your word. Lord, we have the amazing evidence of fulfilled prophecy to help us realize in no uncertain terms that that which you've prophesied has not yet been fulfilled will with will occur with absolute precision. And that includes the rapture, Lord. The rapture is a promise that you've made to those of us that you have shined your grace upon, shined your light upon. Those of us that have accepted you, Lord, and are part of the church are not going to go through that coming tribulation. So, Lord, I just ask that you give us the strength that we need in these days to come, the wisdom, and just be with us, and just bless everyone here, those online, those that couldn't make it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Mhm.